And we are live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legislative Review Committee meeting for today, Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. It's at 1 o'clock and we're in City Hall in room 301B. And I'd like to start off the meeting by mentioning we do have a quorum here with Commissioner Houle, Commissioner Thornton, and Commissioner Culpepper and myself. Commissioner Wright is absent today, but we can move ahead with our work. So we have a discussion or a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve.
Can I have a second to approve the minutes?
I wasn't here at the last meeting, so I don't know if I can approve.
I think you can still make that motion to, actually, I can make it, yeah, I mean, because both of you weren't here.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, great, thanks. Let's move on. We're going on, and I don't believe there's any public input, but we're gonna go into the commission identified items of interest. And I'm gonna hand it over to Assistant Manager Nikki Jones here to just give us an update on this.
Thanks, Commissioner Myers. So we've been talking about the indoor smoking ordinance quite a bit lately. We took an amendment to the ordinance to the full mayor commission last year, and we basically banned vaping products indoor. It was sent back to the LRC, and at the end of the day, I think, my understanding, the American Heart Association wants Athens-Clarke County to be deemed a smoke-free city. So they came and they presented to us and said, there's only one thing that you need to do to become a smoke-free city, and that would be to go into our ordinance and remove exemption number 5 from section 43-5. And I've shared that information with Commissioner Myers, spoken with the attorney's office, and that is something that we can do, but I don't want to speak to the risk of us doing that because I do think it still goes against state law, but it's something that we can do with minimal risk. And Sherry, if I've said that incorrectly, please.
No, I think the concerns that we provided in confidential memos remain. But I think the question of the risk and what's acceptable is entirely up to you all.
You don't have that to put up on the screen, do you, the wording?
I can send it to Sarah real quick, but I can read it also. So
Yeah.
section 5, smoking areas designated by an employer or banquet or meeting rooms when such rooms are being used for private functions, which shall meet the following requirements: A, B, and C. A, smoking area is located in a non-work area. B, air handling systems for smoking areas shall be independent from the main air handling system. And then C, smoking areas shall be free for the use of employees only. And there are more words after each one of those, but that's the general gist of it.
So,
Sorry. Yes. So we're looking.
Commissioner Culpepper.
Number 5, y'all might have discussed this last time, but how many cities are smoke-free and why have they asked us to be smoke-free?
Great question, Commissioner Culpepper. There were a number of cities, including Macon, Savannah, Atlanta, Columbus, and others, but I can't remember the full list that the American Heart Association put forward. So there's a number of cities in Georgia who have this designation.
Can we just summarize that in regular language, the exemption that the exemption that we would have to pull just without, we would just be removing that?
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah,
So I do think there's a point of clarification, and that is that when Ms. Bracci was here, she specifically spoke to removing employee break rooms as an exemption. In state law, there are 2 exemptions. One is related to employee break rooms and one is related to like private banquet areas or things being used for private events. For whatever reason, the exemption in our code combines those 2. So she didn't specifically to this banquet or meeting rooms element, But I would assume the American Heart Association, based on their other recommended changes, would prefer we to strike this entire section. And that is certainly the easiest thing to do logistically. But what she said at the last meeting was employee break rooms, that exception needs to be removed. So theoretically, we could just strike the references to employee break rooms in this subsection. But the discussion that one of the easiest thing is just to strike the entire part.
But you could also, I mean, it's pretty easy, it's just a little bit more complicated striking
Oh, sure.
to just do it so that it applies to banquet and meeting rooms. When such you could allow that and take out the stuff about the employee rooms. So that's a choice. So I think the discussion that I wanted to have here was, I am supportive of removing the exemption, but obviously we need we need more, we need, 3 votes out of 5. So, we need to have some discussion about this. So Commissioner Culpepper.
So we voted to include vaping. And that went to the commission.
Yes, sir.
And why is it back to us? Because the American Heart Association?
Well, and I cannot remember the history, but we have it in our minutes. It'll be there. Asked Mayor Gertz to put it back on so that we could address these small issues that could make us a smoke-free city and seem pretty simple to do. But we were trying to get that through to the vaping through on one vote. So we are following up, yes, at the request of the American Heart Association, also assigned to the committee by Mayor Gertz. Other comments? Questions? Oh, Commissioner Wolf.
I mean, I tend to agree with striking the part that makes us smoke-free at least. And as you all might have seen in the minutes, I'd be interested in striking sections 2 and 4. Or, I mean, section 4 is so complicated and onerous and cites a specific part of OCGA. Maybe not so much that one, but section 2, I know Ms. Brocky spoke to hotel and motel rooms being another area of interest for the American Heart Association, even though it might not be relevant to the designation of smoke-free. And since it seems like that's not really an issue with any of our current establishments, I'm interested in striking that also.
And I believe she also said, if I just remind us on these facts that she shared, that most of the big hotels already do this. It's not an issue. And so that's why it's not as great of concern, but there still might be some mom and pop, small hotels, lower priced, where this is still, it's not, is that, yeah, where you can get smoking rooms. Mr. Thornton, any thoughts?
I would just want to do the minimum.
Number 5, the one that we brought in here.
Just the minimum. If this comes back up at some point, we deal with it. I do not want to overstretch no more when I don't have to. But I do support it.
Commissioner Culpepper?
And I think we are overstepping, and that's what I want to limit the amount that we overstep. People should be able to smoke in private areas, so these things are exempt from the ordinance. So-
Right. And the only one we're looking at really now is, the one, number 5, that's the one we're looking to either delete completely or adjust so that it only, we're not allowing smoking in employee workrooms.
I mean, I feel like that should be the employer's decision. We should have to make that decision.
Well, couldn't one say that about all smoking in general, everywhere?
But I mean, I feel like we're overstretching telling the employers what to do. If they want to have an employee smoking room, break room, they can have it. I don't think we should be the ones telling them what to do.
Okay, so we've heard from John. Would we like to, does anyone want to have more discussion or make a motion?
Question, staff have any clarification on that question of festival zones that came up last month?
I apologize, I did not get back to you on that. I think it would be extremely difficult to limit what people can do in terms of smoking on public streets. But I would need to research that more, and I apologize, I didn't have a chance to do that.
And I guess I'll, at this point, drop that one, but, I'd like to move to strike sections 5 and 2 from the code and advance it to the commission for recommendation.
Do we have a second
Let me
on
see the
that?
5 and 2 again.
So it's 2 here,
Okay.
hotel and motel rooms,
Uh-huh.
and then 5, so it'd be all of 5, based on that motion.
Attorney Hines, I know we talked about 5 specifically, but we didn't talk about 2.
Yeah.
Is that,
I mean, to the extent that it's helpful, I would just reiterate the concerns we have expressed in previous confidential moments. I think that 2 is of much greater risk than 5. You know, Ms. Brock, again, I apologize. Does anyone know how to say her name properly?
Brachi?
Brachi, I apologize. Brachi was last year. She really emphasized number 5, I think in part because, what she said is that basically nobody has smoking employee break rooms anymore. I think, having not done any research, that while the big hotels, probably don't have smoking rooms, I suspect we'd find that there are a large number of lower income hotels in the community that do still allow smoking rooms. And so I just think you'd want to assess the risk of whether any of those might litigate against us by changing this.
Does anyone want to make a second to Jesse's motion or a substitute motion?
I think I'll make the substitute motion. A motion that we adopt this 5.
To delete it from the ordinance?
That is as Ms. Brocci requests, because again, she did not emphasize 2.
Okay.
And I do not want to, if we gotta deal with it later, so that would be my motion.
Do we have a second for that one?
Your motion is to take these exemptions out or leave them in?
The only ones I'm gonna take out are the
It's 5.
5.
A, B, and C.
And as a reminder, that would be the minimum we would have to do to become a smoke-free city per the American Heart Association. Now, I don't know this for sure.
Okay. Do we,
And that's what I was trying to get to. I guess I need to back up. I assume we want that designation.
I would like that designation.
Okay, if we want that designation, the minimum
Yeah.
is what I would agree to.
Which is what I asked, Assistant Manager Jones to come up with and present us with. So you just made a motion to delete that. Do we have a second motion on, a second on that motion?
Second, Commissioner Clinton. I would just like to clarify, I mean, we'll move on after this, but, Ms. Brockie did speak to the other sections. The main section that they wanted to emphasize for the purposes of the designation is section 5, but the American Heart Association did recommend that we strike section 2 as well. And they gave us some information on why they thought that was important, but I'm
That's
okay with that.
correct. Okay.
I'm gonna go, are we still at discussion?
Or we can discuss it or we can vote on it and move on.
I do want to chime in to John's point. I guess my question is, and Carol, you kind of answered it. You said, yes, we would like to be a designate, and I guess I would too. I would.
Mhm.
I don't know if we have, but I'm not gonna backtrack, but I don't know, where I'm uncomfortable is, I don't know, I think we make decisions without having input from people who are going to be directly impacted. We do this all the time. And I know it's extra work to talk to folk outside of City Hall. But me personally, I would like the information. But I do think that if I have my druthers, I would want to have a more robust conversation of people that,
Are impacted by
are
it,
impacted.
like we did for the pet registration.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and that's my only thing. I think, again, I don't know if we've done so much work, Sherry's done so much work on this. I would hate to say, let's back up now. So that's my substitute to, maybe we should have done some preliminary stuff before we decided one or two people want to be smoke-free designation.
and perhaps we could put that in the records in our great minutes and ask our staff to keep that in mind, that you help remind us of that as we go on to new ordinances or new legislation, so that we can consider whether or not we have missing voices that we want to bring in as we move forward. Please.
Yeah, like I said, I'm moving forward on this because of all the work that has already been put into this. But I do think on this committee, or even Jill said, we do need to have some kind of effort to, and if nobody responds, no loss. So yeah, that's my position and my rationale.
Do we have any feedback from business owners or anybody like that on how this would positively or negatively affect them?
No, we don't. We have the information that was shared with the Heart Association.
Okay.
And that's what we're speaking to make a commitment to do a better job of that moving forward, per Commissioner Thornton's comments.
I'll even ask, Assistant Manager, Jones, what do we need to do in place or have in place that we make sure we have? Is there a policy that we need or something in writing that we are going to, every committee, when it's an ordinance, especially this ordinance, that, we are going to seek some type of community engagement? I mean, is that something that needs to be, in writing?
No, I think, the short answer on question is we can do that for every ordinance that comes in front of us. That means that our process will take longer and if that's what we need to do, we'll do it. And if we need to try to survey the community, just like we did for the pet registration, on the things that we're discussing here in the LRC, we can do that. There's a level of time for our geospatial information office who really deals with surveys and our public information office who deals with surveys. But the short answer is yes, we can do that for everything that comes here. It's just gonna take more time.
I think time is very valuable, but making decisions that it's only 3 or 4 programs at the most, the commission, it's worth it at the end of the day. When ordinances come, we're either gonna hear from the people on the front end or we're gonna hear from on the back end. And I do think that, again, the only reason I'm even agreeing with my motion today, because I know the effort and the work that has been put into this already. So yes, that's what I stand.
Can we end the discussion now and just have a vote so we can move on to our transportation people? You all good with that? Okay, all in favor of supporting Commissioner Thornton's motion to remove exemption 5, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, and so that passes 3-1. Out of this committee, it also then has to go to the whole commission.
Do we need a separate motion to pass this out of committee, or is that?
No, I think it goes out of committee, but I would ask the LRC give me a little bit of guidance here, because I do want to be responsive, and I do think it's a good idea for us to engage. If every item that we discuss here in this committee, I think we can go out and do a level of engagement, and we're gonna have to define that. And I don't disagree with that, but I just, for me to be able to provide direction to our team, it'd be helpful if I understood where the LRC stood on that. It's like for every item, we can do engagement on it for sure. If that's the wish of the committee.
I think it gives us better transparency if we're having the public involved. And that's the only reason why I voted no. I'm not against this, but I feel like it's not fair to make decisions. We don't know how it's going to affect businesses in places like that. We need their input.
I have to remind myself this, John, so I'm saying this to myself as much as to you, because sometimes we vote on things here and I think, and in some of these other committees that I'm on, I'm like, oh, there's the final decision. So this is going to go through a whole, like all of these are going to go through that. And I think they're, the agenda setting cycle and so forth. And so, my direction to, like my thoughts on going forward is to have some discussion about this. I'm just thinking about the invasive species that we just went through. I mean, you could get a graduate degree in there and have people coming in on both sides and people who have bamboo and don't want to do that. And so it becomes a lot of public comment there, which probably would be good for the whole commission to have, if they weren't going to watch all our meetings. So it perhaps is something we can bring up at the beginning of the introduction of each of these items, so that we can see whether or not where we need to go from here. Like we have an intro, do we need to go forth with public input?
I agree, because that's going to save us time, because now we haven't gotten the public input. We're going through the agenda setting cycle. If they kick it back, it's going to require even more work. So it'd be more important to get it right the first time going
Right.
through versus having to back up.
Well, on this one, again, that's, like I said, I know the work that staff has put into this, and I appreciate it. So if we get to agenda, setting on this particular one, and kick it back to the work, as we move forward though,
Mhm.
Right. Whatever the topic is, decide as a committee, does this one need to?
And maybe as much as, missing voices for us to make the decision.
Right.
I think of public comment in general, we have an hour and a half. Do we want to have an hour and a half of public comment, or do we want to say what specific kind of input do we need from business owners here rather than a general open to everyone?
I agree.
And that's what we did with the, PEG stuff.
Yes,
That was
yes.
the first comment we said is, how's it going to affect the vets? We made those comments, then we reached out to
Right.
the vets, and then we made decisions, and we also got input from the public.
Yeah.
And that's what really weighed on our decision, was the public was against it.
Well, that came out a lot, but we had that input. We also had the input where we didn't have the comparable, there were examples in other communities that weren't, for me, and that weren't compelling, that it was cost effective and made any changes. So there was a lot, it's just thinking upfront about any other resources that are gaps that we need to bring in besides our wonderful selves and the attorney and the manager's office and staff.
Well, I appreciate that feedback. And so what we'll do moving forward is when a new topic is introduced, one of the very first things we'll talk about is, how much engagement do you think this is required? Thank you so much for that feedback.
Okay, and moving on to our next item.
And I won't talk a lot about this one. I'll quickly turn it over to Director Bailey. This is the Voluntary Residential Traffic Management Program. So last month, we briefly talked about it. As you may know, we did an overhaul on the overall neighborhood traffic management program, subsequently residential traffic management program, and that was a data-driven approach. And that's the opt-out policy. So if your road is selected, you have, this is the converse of that. So this is the opt-in policy, or the voluntary RTMP. And at the last meeting, we talked about how this policy could mirror our current sidewalk policy. So it looked very similar. So with that, I want to turn it over to Director Bailey, because I believe he has two handouts in front of you.
Yes, so we did bring you
the 2015 policy for voluntary sidewalk assessment districts. And then also the latest version of the draft for the voluntary traffic calming residential traffic management policy. The only difference is in the voluntary RTMP are that some of the language you'd asked to change, like any instance of homeowner was changed to property owner. And then we just further described in the very last section, J, how the process happens after you all have voted on it, which is more of a staff procedure on how we move forward with it, but I thought it was good information for people to know. So you all had, I think, I wasn't at the last meeting, but reading through the minutes and talking with staff, I think you all had some good discussion on this and came away with some big questions that still needed further discussion. So I can get into those if you want me to dive in. The biggest one I think that you came to was the different petition thresholds. I think that was one of the biggest pieces of the conversation. Staff had recommended 2 points of reaching consensus. The first one is asking the neighborhood basically, hey, are y'all even interested in traffic calming here? And to even get us involved and start spending some staff time, we needed to hear that a majority of people were interested in traffic calming. So we'd set a 65% response rate, just saying, yes, we're interested in something, please come out and give us some options. So that's the first consensus. I think most people were good with that portion of it. The second part, though, is once we've given them some options, we've handed them a concept drawing, we've given them an estimated price. Now we're asking for consensus on, is the neighborhood ready to move forward with this, and are you willing to pay for it? And that's where, from staff's perspective, we asked that this would be 100% consensus from the property owners, because they're the ones paying for these. And that's where I think there was some discussion back and forth. So I think maybe we could start there and revisit that discussion, see what y'all are comfortable with putting there.
I do have a question here. I mean, and then I'll get to all the committee members here, but just thinking about this, I'm thinking about a situation in the back of Green Acres that connects to McDuffie, and people are concerned about the safety there. And what are the sidewalk's in front of my house, right? Or in front of these houses. It's clear who's using, well, I mean, everyone can walk on it, but it's in front of my property. So who are the affected people? Like, let's say these people in that area wanted to go this way, because that wasn't qualifying for the other, our opt-out one. So what are the boundaries of this 100%? How would that work? I mean, with speed, that affects a lot of people.
It does. And so that is one of that first section G, A through C, basically, where traffic engineering staff, once they've heard where the issue, they've talked with constituents, once they've heard where the issues are, the first thing they do is draw a map that shows where the traffic calming, whatever type of traffic calming is going to be, where they think the boundaries of that should be. And then every parcel that's adjacent to that stretch of roadway would be considered an affected property under there. So if it's, Tim, I don't know if you can talk to, the usual scope of those boundaries, if it's usually block by block, or if I know we look at speed and volume. So if it's where we see that spike, in speed and volumes, but maybe there's some more information.
We've looked block by block, we've looked by segments of roads. For instance, Arch Street, the only segment that was interested that we could find that we determined was that section east of Peter Street. So we did not include the other. But then also you consider something like Forest Heights Drive. We consider the entire neighborhood there at Kingswood subdivision. We consider the whole neighborhood because there's basically one thoroughfare through there and everyone in the neighborhood has to use it. So we opened it up to everyone to vote in those two instances.
And I think part of it's a back and forth conversation with the residents, right? Because they're going to come to us with an idea of where they think it's needed. And then based on that idea, staff looks to say either, yes, you've got it spot on, or no, we actually think it might be a little bit longer of a segment than what you're bringing to us. So it is a back and forth, I believe, as well.
So we have to have 65% of the property owners agree to look at it, but then 100% agree to fund it. Is that right?
That's right. That's just to protect staff time at the big
Right.
caregivers.
My question though, is there a lot of time that we're wasting if we only have 65%? Cause you know, if that other 35% don't want it, then they're not gonna wanna pay for it either. It's gonna be hard to get to the 100%.
So you're proposing 100% interest to begin with.
I don't know. I think it's, if you don't have them the first time around, then how are you gonna get them when they've gotta pay for it?
Sure. So the amount of staff time from project identification all the way until we hopefully receive that 100% petition, is, got it broken down right here. So let's see, 3, 4, 10, 13, about 13 hours of time, total. So, not a huge amount of time, but certainly some.
I think it's important also, John, because this is like I'm going back now and remembering this. The payment itself, because that's what was throwing me off. The county is not involved with that, if I remember correctly. So you're the leader on your stretch of block and you're the contact. Somehow you have to get them a check. We're not. So if we only had 65%, or pitch it, like you didn't have to get all of them to, well, actually you have to get 100% to obtain the required support, right?
But again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that was a little, all confusing to me as well. Commissioner Hool.
Yeah, I just want to run through a few things that I think are to clarify for myself and then maybe follow up on last meeting. So first, the way this is set up, we're only moving forward at all with projects that TPW deems would be justified from a public safety standpoint. They might not be high on the list, but there's justification for traffic calming at all to, you're not gonna put in infrastructure that goes against what you would recommend.
We would not put in something that we wouldn't recommend. So we do
get
get,
to meet the standards everyone else has to be, correct?
so we would be looking at what type of infrastructure would be allowable on these types of roads and in what capacity, if it's a speed hump, what type are they looking at? If it's something beyond a speed hump, does it meet the roadway specification guides that we have? So those are the things that we would have to meet. What we don't have to meet are the same restrictions that we put on the data-driven model as far as, where they rank in prioritization, minimum volume.
Exactly, so essentially this can give a neighborhood an opportunity to, if they pay for it themselves, get it done sooner than would happen through the data-driven process where it's low priority compared to the other 100 streets.
That's right.
That's essentially what this is doing here.
Yes.
That confuses me, following up on your thing, because,
Well, I think I might know where you guys are going with this. So my understanding is if someone submits their street to go through a study, right? We are gonna review it to make sure whatever is put out there is approved by us and it meets certain standards. So just because they submit it doesn't mean that they're gonna actually get it.
It has to be a street that the traffic calming is justified according to our,
It meets all the criteria.
And the type of infrastructure that's put in would be the type that you all would recommend is best for the street.
Correct.
So with that in mind,
right,
the second thing is we're looking for payment upfront for it actually, let's say we get through the whole, everyone wants it to happen, however whatever our threshold is.
Sure.
That group, whatever's been identified by y'all, makes the payment before the stuff goes in the ground, right? The way this is set up, acceptance of, looking at section.
And that, they just have to show that they are able to fund this, so that they have a funding mechanism that they'll use to pay for a private contractor to do the work.
Okay, so in my mind, the two things here that I would suggest we change, and this kind of echoes what was discussed the last meeting, I know y'all couldn't get into that. One is, I think if it's being paid for, it's up to the neighborhood to decide what they consider equitable to distribute the payment. So if there's people in the neighborhood who can't pay or don't want to pay, but ultimately the project is being paid for, from our perspective, I don't think it matters how many people in the neighborhood paid for it, as long as it's paid for. Like, we don't have to dictate to them the even distribution of contribution. So with that in mind, I also don't think we need 100% support. And part of why, I mean, when we're talking about property owners, we're talking about someone who can own a lot that's vacant, right? We're talking about someone who can own a lot that's undeveloped,
Or renting and they live far
renting
away.
in
and hard to
another
get.
state. And so in my mind, 65% is a pretty high majority. It's a super majority. It's more than we ever, our elections are always 50% plus one, right? So it's a pretty high bar to look for in the first place. I think if there's still 65% support from the neighborhood to do it, and from whoever's supportive, they've got the money to pay for it, I don't think we need 100%. I mean, if we have, think of a neighborhood the size of Forest Heights, if you have 100% required there, and any one property owner can veto the other 200 and something property owners, that just seems a little absurd to me. So I would think 65% is an adequate threshold, especially when we're considering that this is ultimately public safety infrastructure that our department thinks is warranted. It's just not as high of a priority as the stuff that we're gonna pay for through the data-driven other policy we've already passed, so.
Commissioner Culpepper, then Commissioner Thorne.
So if it's 65%, the options for traffic calming, is there stuff that would affect their property where they would lose, right of way, stuff like that?
Mhm.
So think about if
Right.
you do not want it, but the other rest of the people want it, but your yard is gonna be affected, however way. I don't think that's fair.
Right.
That's right. So, in most cases, I'm gonna say 90% of cases, most people are gonna ask for probably speed humps, which will not affect right away. But let's say that let's throw out a unique case of they have an intersection in their neighborhood that they really want like a traffic circle there to slow people down at that intersection. And to do that, they might need to purchase some corners of people's property. So I get what you're saying there. That has the potential to happen. And so that one more reason why we leans toward the 100%, but there may be another way to write in anyone, this would also require the agreement for any necessary right of way
Yeah.
for those affected parcels.
So there's probably not being affected.
I guess my thought is, when this came before us, I thought it was a good idea. But we have a large percentage of rental. And we have some landlords that are not the best landlords. And I'm thinking, let me say this, there's some areas that we have a large amount of rental families that are low income. And some of that property where they're staying is inadequate anyway. Why would we think that a landlord would invest in this when they're not even keeping up their the actual units? I was about to call some areas that I might get sued, got in there, so I won't say it. But I don't think this is going to really help the folks we're trying to help.
This isn't, I mean, I don't think this is gonna help middle and upper middle class. I mean, like, I guess someone told me it was $100, maybe I could get, I don't think that I would go along with stuff like this. I'd be like chipping in, like, here's another $1,000 in my neighborhood. So it is for people who have this opt-in, is for neighborhoods where they do have more.
And we have those, we do have them, they come down all the time. But the people who really need the help, they don't come to us
Right.
at all. And so we got to think about those groups of folks. So my other question, let's say everything goes really good. Give me an example of how they pay
So
or how they could pay.
one of the easiest ways is if they have an HOA, their HOA would actually just assess the fee and pay directly. They would contact a private contractor who would do the work, usually maybe an asphalt company, a paving company, or small construction company, and they would contract with them directly. And then that company would come through us for all the permits they needed to do, and we would have a couple instances where we check in and make sure everything's to spec. And then at the end of the day, they're paid, we see, hopefully we see what it's like on the roadway, and we're done. So that's one of the simplest ways to do it.
Now, HOA, yeah, I could see that,
Yeah.
but that group of folks that I'm talking about, even on my street, you know, they would not be able to take advantage, and they probably are those folks that need that stuff more. So, you know, I don't know what the, other options are, but this definitely does not, include
No.
folk.
Yeah, there's two other options that come to mind. One is actually, a group has already reached out to us, wanting to know about this policy is, Columbia Brookside. So, through Housing Authority, they've told us, hey, we've got the money to do this. We'd
But
like.
that's the housing authority.
That's right. So that's another instance where there's an entity that has that ability, right? We've hit the same wall. What about people who don't have an HOA, don't have any kind of official entity to help them through this funding? And we'd really need some help from either finance or legal or combination to figure out, is there kind of a group that can lead them through escrow or something, you know, we've talked about different types of districts we can apply for this, but that does make it more complicated. Yeah.
And so I spoke with
I think we-
John. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you respond to that, then Commissioner Hall.
Just briefly, I spoke with John Hawkins about this, just because he does do more work at TBW to get his thoughts, and he said, reality is we could do it through assessments, but that means essentially that however much of the cost is, it's going to be attached to someone's property tax bill, so it'll still be going to those property owners at some point, it just would be done that way.
And to piggyback on that, in some cases, the property owner, if it were a rental, they could pass that burden back on to.
That's affordable. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
Well, there's another ad.
Well, I mean, we do have we can put more money into the opt-out policy. Okay, but Commissioner Hall.
So the existing policy that we all spent a lot of time on and adopted, that's the way that we're addressing where the highest need is, where the biggest safety issues are, where the issues of generations of inequity are trying to be addressed by building equity into that tool. So really, I think if we want to put our best foot forward on making a difference in all those regards, we as a commission, when we're talking about the budget this month, need to be putting more money into the existing residential traffic management. Practically speaking, when I think about, so the sidewalk program that we've got a copy of here, only one neighborhood's ever used, and it happens to be a neighborhood that was in my district that I helped walk the HOA people through, Lake Mueller. And they had a little sidewalk gap at the front of their subdivision that the developer, when they built the subdivision, never completed like they were supposed to. And so they were like, can we just complete this dang sidewalk so that when people in our neighborhoods are walking their dogs, they don't have to go out onto the busy street? And TPW has a sidewalk gap program. That particular sidewalk gap, compared to all the other ones around the county that's far more dangerous than that one, wasn't gonna get funded by TPW through their existing priority structure anytime soon. So this neighborhood with an HOA said, hey, if we pay for it, can we just put it in there? Which essentially, we're thinking, you know, on a 40-year timeline, saves the county some money because now, you know, this neighborhood's paid for it. One more off the list. So if we look at our existing list of projects that accompanied the policy that we just passed a few months ago for the existing RTMP, there was what, like 130 or something like that projects, and probably more will get added to that list as more assessment is done. And we've got enough budget right now to maybe do, you know, 5, optimistically 10 a year, depending on the cost of those projects. So if you're number 60 on that list, TPW still said like, hey, we should do some traffic calming here. It's not as bad. There aren't as many historical equity issues in this neighborhood as this one. So it's number 60 instead of number 2. Well, if number 60 happens to be an HOA and they can pay for it, and then that gets taken off the list and we're overall, you know, moving through the very long list a bit faster, that's to me the value of this program. So when I think of an example neighborhood that could be like Lake Mueller for this program, it would be Westwood Hills, who has a large number of residents who really want to get some speed humps or some kind of traffic calming in a couple of places where the people who live there see people speeding all the time. And TPW has said like, yeah, this is warranted, but also if I recall, it's pretty far down on the list. They're an HOA. Now, there's hundreds of properties there, so I doubt they're gonna get 100% support. But I bet as a neighborhood, they could pool enough funds to pay for a couple of speed humps. And so that would be an example in my mind of where like, hey, we've got a neighborhood that can get a needed safety infrastructure that we've all already agreed should be there, but isn't as high priority as other places that we know we want to have it happen ASAP, like Westchester and Stonehenge or whatever. So they're gonna pool the money in, you know, however many people in Westwood Hills want to pay through their HOA, that's up to them to figure out. But if we're getting the money, as long as
Yeah,
they meet some kind of decent threshold of support within their neighborhood, and it's not just two, you know, really excited neighbors, then we put it in.
Yeah.
So that's where I go back to saying like, kind of move forward with this as is,
Yeah.
but reduce the threshold for
Yeah.
final approval to 65%. And
And
I
would I be correct in paraphrasing Jesse, and then I'll go to someone else, is saying in a shorter way, that as a homeowner, I can do things on my property to make my house safer, but I can't do anything on the street. I can't hire someone to do this. So in a sense, what we're doing is we're creating a process for neighborhoods to do maintenance improvement work on their streets if they're willing to pay for it. That's, you know, I mean, that is basically what we're doing, right? Because otherwise you can't, like, unless you're in a HOA, you can't go, if you're in a private thing, you can't go put a speed bump in there.
Yeah, like I said, when we brought this up, it sounded great and it still sounds great. I can see where people are gonna get, we're gonna get pushback. People are already paying property taxes. There's some of us that wanna increase property taxes. We're gonna get the same conversations about stormwater. I pay a stormwater, I get a storm, they may not pay it, but they get a bill. But-
Why aren't I getting
I'm
this?
not-
Why do I have to pay for this?
And so I don't think this is as clear cut as, I would not, I'm gonna have to think about this one again. It almost goes back to what we were saying earlier about input from folk, you know, because the word that I'm hearing is HOAs and groups like the Housing Authority, but you're still not telling me about, not Sunset, the little street by my house. Whatever, it's where all the duplexes at,
Sick?
no,
No.
by
Well,
my house.
but I mean, I think that's where we have to put more money in the one where we're doing it.
And that needs to be spelled out a little bit more for me before I can jump on board with this. If I sound skeptical, I've been on the commission for 5 years, okay? I'm very skeptical. I need to see this.
We see the value of it at all.
And how everybody is, not everybody, but the majority of folk are going to benefit. If you're HOA or an entity like the Housing Authority or anything, I could, yeah, they could write a check. But
Liz, I do want to get to another, did you have a point before?
Well, I just want to make, yeah, I do have a point, I guess. So if we could designate traffic calming that would not take people right away. But also, and what's the cost of those things? So if you get 65% that want to do it and it's not, affecting anybody's yard, they're responsible for hiring the contractor. They're responsible for paying the contractor. What if the contractor walks off the job?
Right.
Then who's liable?
So we talked about that to some degree as well. What we were more worried about is what if the contractor installs something and we look at it and we say, this doesn't meet our specs.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to rip it. We'll go to the contractor and say, you need to redo this. And they'll say, no, we got paid, we're gone. And then we would just be left ripping that out of the ground and putting it back. And whoever paid the money to the contractors either would have to, go after them for those. So the only thing that we thought through from a staff perspective is actually requiring a performance bond from the contractor.
Mhm.
And so that way they're on the hook for, at the end of meeting that performance.
Yeah, some kind of accountability with the contractor.
And that's-
You don't want them, because the neighborhood's gonna pick a little bit. They want to get it done the cheapest. Well, what if the contractor's not that qualified?
Right. And that's why, part of the requirements in the very end that we talked about were, that they would have to apply and get a right-of-way encroachment permit, which would include language on performance bonds. So,
Is it possible, I know that, before this came up, we work with contractors, Jacobson and whoever. Is it possible to have a list that you could recommend? They don't have to, people that we've had good experience with, they don't have to accept it, they can still go with their person.
might be another attorney office question, if we have a preferred vendors list that we offer or not.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about as we went through this is that we really need to loop in risk on this as well, because I think what we're really speaking to is fundamentally the bonds and or insurance to make sure that they can follow through. So I think that would be the next step, and certainly not opposed to an approved vendor list in concept, but I'm concerned about the idea of, local government sort of being seen as making one of the users. And so I think we generally avoided that. So I think we should just talk to risk and see if they have some thoughts about how we can do it.
I did want to go back, speaking about the, how does this help, some of the low income neighborhoods? And because I think to Commissioner Rahul's point, the biggest thought was this gets some of the higher affluent neighborhoods out of the other program, right? So you're getting them out of the government funded the bigger neighborhoods out of the government funded program, and frees up that money to go toward people who really need it. But I also wanted to point out, some other mechanisms to also get some of those neighborhoods funded as well. And T-Splost is a perfect example of that. East Athens T-Splost is one example where that neighborhood put together a proposal. It includes traffic calming. And so because that proposal got accepted, traffic calming will happen on some of those neighborhoods. So there are some other funding mechanisms to get people outside of that data-driven program that we just, approved a couple months ago. There are other ways to get people traffic calming on their neighborhoods as well.
Is that spelled out in some of this that I'm writing, that concept that Commissioner Hu gave an example? Is there a matrix or a diagram? Or is it somewhere in here?
It's not in the policy. I feel like it should be written into if y'all, the agenda item that you put in front of full commission, that might be a place to speak to why there's value behind this program. The policy itself tries to stay value neutral as far as that goes. But I think that from y'all's point of view, you're trying to sell this to the entire commission if it's something that you believe in. I think that's a value to state there.
I want to ask a question about this, so back to GB. GB, yes, and the point Commissioner Hu brought up. And I can speak to you definitely afterwards about this, because I do have this just about some of the areas where you might have pushback and say, using the phrase of the day, I have lived experience. I know in this little segment, people go fast. You guys haven't put me on this list, but I'm walking out there and people are speeding down this hill. How do we, why do we give any value to that in that area? Because I was thinking, and I don't know about this matrix we have and how it's reevaluated, if people can ask for a recalibration of it, because I'm sure that sometimes there could be mistakes in this. I was under the impression that, clearly you're not gonna, someone at the end of a cul-de-sac is not gonna put in like they wanna put in, speed bumps right there. But the instance I'm thinking of, which I was told that there was no, that couldn't get it, is a connector road, a short, I don't know, quarter of a mile, not even that much, eighth of a mile, connecting two parts of a neighborhood that go out onto Barnett Shoals and onto, Old Lexington, people use that as a cut through, and it is a fast little space. So, you know, my common sense on that tells me that, yeah, you know, maybe actually in that short section, there is an issue. But now you guys are telling me that those people, like I was like, oh, we're gonna have this program, and you could do this yourself. I'm not sure if they're gonna, you know, how they're gonna work out, but now you're telling me that they can't do that?
I would only say, I think when we assess the area,
Yeah,
the only thing that we may do is expand the area based on, if we see, if they say, look, it's this one little stretch that's the issue, then you might look at it and say, if you think it's there, that's fine, but we also see some issues over here, because they're paying for it, and it's not data driven.
right.
I don't think we would deny them and say, oh, you have less traffic than you think. They're, if it
Or
meets
less
our,
speed than you
right,
think.
if it's
Because
still-
there's speed bumps on one side and there's speed bumps over here, but this little connector thing, there's nothing. And I do know that it's a place that.
Yeah.
You know,
if there are no restrictions technically to put stuff in there and they are paying for it, I don't think we would say we wouldn't study this area or do a project. I think the biggest issue is that traffic engineering is looking at that small section, but they're also taking a bigger step back to see
Yeah.
if more of the neighborhood should get involved in this or not.
right. Well, I just got I got the impression that was an example of a place where I'm like, oh, that's clearly an option. And I kind of got from what Commissioner Hull was saying, that wouldn't even be considered because it's not in your 123. So that's what I need some clarification on that.
I'll give you an example of where we might deny one. From my understanding, we can't do speed humps after the crest of a tall hill.
Within 300 feet of a horizontal or vertical curve.
So if someone specifically says, hey, we want speed humps right here, and it's right after the crest of a hill, we would say, because of our technical.
Right.
That's.
That would increase the chances of water jumping the curb and going into somebody's yard, so
Yeah.
it need to shift or may not be feasible.
Right.
So we're not denying based on whether we think it's a high or low priority, we would just be denying or expanding based on the technical.
So that's a little bit different than what Commissioner Hull was saying.
So to clarify, I think what I was getting at is, we've already got this list that's been generated from.
Right.
But anyone who wants to bring forth a proposal, it still has to go through an assessment to figure out whether it would qualify. Like, is there a justification?
Well, the reality is we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of roads, and something might be, we can evaluate all of them and say, this one is 799, you know, they have some kind of ranking on these roads, so, and that's what I kind of got the impression before, that we were saying we were only gonna, it was only if it met this criteria, and they're like, people going fast, and maybe we're saying, well, there's no one going under 35, but 34 in that little area makes people feel dangerous. So I just want to make sure that we're not too restrictive if we do adopt this in terms of who can and can't, get it, and what kind of analysis is going on.
That's right.
I'm sorry. So you brought up something about the T-Splosh for East Athens. Are any of those roads that are on the list now, are they in that project? So we don't have them on two of the same lists. That makes
So I
sense?
know East Athens met for the very first time this past week. Have we adopted a geographical scope of East?
Not yet. We're gonna bring that to the next meeting and then try to nail it down.
I don't know that any of them were on like this year's, I don't think that any of them were on this year's program, but that's a good point that, at that point, they'd be removed from the NTM or RTMP list as well, because they're funded through T-Splosh. But I think we need to know which roads are within that project first before we go for it.
Yeah, the RTMP is generating a list of that formula that we approved, that they've got built in, says are the highest priority. And then T-Splosh is just an example of one of the ways that we can
One of
fund
the
it.
funding sources.
And so if there's a T-Splosh project that's zeroed in on a road, it's irrelevant where on that list it is.
That's right.
It's not a
No,
T-Splosh project.
It'll take it off this list.
That's right.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, two things that I know are on the list that are also T-Splosh projects would be Westchester and Old Lumber Road.
They would go into the T-Splosh project instead of this.
They just
Well,
be funded out of
They get
T-Splosh.
funded
Yeah,
at
funded,
T-Splosh,
yes.
and then they get removed
Yeah.
from the list once it's done.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So the list that we saw earlier, for speed humps, have we started that yet?
So we've got markings on the ground this week and the contractor's starting next week to actually install there's 10 neighborhoods that are happening this summer. So should be in the next 2 months and then everything should be done.
All right, here's the personal question. Is Saxon Woods one of those that got that marking?
Saxon Woods on that.
I believe so. One of the.
If not, go back and fix it.
Yeah.
I guess that, it's two, I don't know how long we want to be here, but so I'm curious if we've arrived at some kind of consensus on maybe moving forward with this. I mean, are y'all amenable?
I'll wait and see what Saxon Woods.
It's third on the list.
Okay. Now what you say?
Are y'all amenable, given what we discussed with, section HC, where we reduced that from, and IA, reducing that from 100 down to 65, given what we've talked about with regard to
I put a,
how it would be funded.
I'd like to put on that, with the exception of any properties that are affected, that the land is affected, have to have 100%.
And so maybe can we add a section that says
We got some-
any property whose, who's.
No,
So similar to the dirt roads policy, part of the process of approval would be that we have signed agreement that property, that necessary right of ways is donated or acquired for this. So yes, that would be, we could build that in.
So if a homeowners association is paying for it, only 65% agree to it. Then, but the homeowners association is gonna assess everybody in the,
Well, we don't know.
what they were telling me, that's what I was thinking about last time. They're like, that's not our problem. They gotta figure that out.
They might not. They might say that whatever they want to sit in their meeting and discuss as far as how they collect that money. I do think I want to, so I wrote that down for HC, somehow show an agreement or a check from them that's a signed agreement saying, yes, we will have this funding, or a check that is literally the funding. Somehow that mechanism has to be there before we come in front of you all with an agenda item, right? So maybe this is again an attorney's office question, but do we just need to wait until we have a check from them before we bring it? Or is a signed agreement stating that they will raise this money?
But the check won't be coming to us, it's going to the vendor.
That's true.
It's gonna be an escrow, I thought.
Or whichever, yeah, since we are not going to be doing anything to incur a cost aside from staff time, I'm less concerned from a legal perspective
Okay.
of what that looks like.
So the agenda is just blessing it as long as the neighborhood's able to pay for it.
Right, like if they have a certified, I mean, it doesn't have to be certified, but some sort of letter indicating that they have the funds, maybe a bank statement or something, I don't know, but, I think whatever would give staff comfort before moving ahead with that level of work is appropriate.
Feel like we'd like to see an agreement of just a signed letter saying, yes, we have a funding mechanism and we're going to reach that.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
I'm going back to June day, I think, Commissioner Meyer. And
Mhm.
I know we said it verbally and Steve and made it clear that it's like a policy. But I still would like the whole
Some
thought
additional-
of how people move up or down or, whatever. I would like to see that in writing. If it's too much to go into a policy, but I'd like to be able to clarify and make sure those neighborhoods are low income do not get left behind. I would like that in writing somewhere.
I think
Process.
that's our existing RTMP, the one that's publicly funded.
But this looks like it's taking the place of, and it needs to not look
Oh.
like that.
I recommend some kind of facts and issue in the agenda that says, knowing that there are neighborhoods unable to pay for these themselves, or I'm just making up the language like it, but and that we'd like to get them higher up on the data-driven approach. This policy is in place to take some of the more affluent HOAs off of that list, right? So
Choose
just
to go on it. And then you also have to make sure we also got the reverse thing. that Commissioner Thornton's bringing up, where people are like, like, okay, now I pay for my tax money and now I'm not getting anything. So I think we gotta be really careful on the language. But what I think would be handy for us, because a lot of times when these LRC things come up, they don't have an agenda report, it's just the policy. And so a little bit of background that we have this other policy, that these roads are going on this year, like that priority list there. And then that now as an extra, like we do with the sidewalk, we have an opt-in, that this is a process that we're paralleling. So I would really appreciate that, because that would give us the talking points then to make clear in the public forum.
I would echo that, and, this voluntary policy is not necessarily for affluent folks. Affluent folks pay for taxes just like everybody else.
Yeah.
However, being affluent does give you other abilities to just go ahead and pay for these things. So if they opted in and volunteered for such, they could do that.
So we're actually giving folk options.
That's exactly what this is.
And that probably needs to be stated in some legal or policy way. You have an option now.
Also, to not make this sound like it's all for fluid neighborhoods, I mean, if we've got the housing authority already expressing interest, their residents are not particularly affluent residents. It's just that they're saying like, hey, this road where we'd like to make it safer for all the folks who live in Columbia Brookside,
Right.
we're willing to pay for the infrastructure, even though it's number whatever, 30 or on the list, right? And so why would, this gives us an opportunity to do that. If we don't have this program in place, there's nothing the housing authority can do but wait until it's their turn on the long list of things that, even if we put a lot of funding into the budget this year, it's still gonna take us years to get to that.
I just don't folk to think that this policy takes away or substitutes what we're already.
Well, I will, when I bring this up in the meeting and make, and I will make that point, and then you can follow up and make that point. So I think it's, because it's hard enough for us to keep track of these different agenda items that we're putting forth. The public, that was 6 months ago or whatever. So I think it is very important that really.
This is really a good policy if people understand how people move up and move out.
And what the main way we're dealing with this is, like with the sidewalks, that's been one, this might never be used. So where are we now? Do we want to see some of this language just finalized?
I'll make one more talk about this.
Okay.
Goes to.
Can I reiterate my question about the 65 instead of 100? Are y'all amenable with that, given where they're at now?
Making people pay for it, they don't want it.
So it wouldn't be making people pay for it.
But we don't know if the homeowners association is gonna assess them.
But the homeowners associations right now, think of it this way. I mean, this is the way I gotta think for the homeowners association. Like, they assess things all the time that they change the fees on and they don't get 100%. Maybe you need to say something on that. So, people say, why am I paying this? My homeowners association just went up. I didn't want that. I just had two people say something like that to me in different places.
I guess that's where they're not taking either property or the right of way.
Yeah.
To go back to the neighborhood that I had as an example, and it's now District 5, but it was District 6 at the time when I was talking about. Westwood Hills and River Bottom, they went through this whole thing trying to raise money to put their signs in, and they used their HOA infrastructure to pay for and build and, install those signs. But everybody in the neighborhood didn't pay for it. They did like a separate fundraising campaign for those signs. So ultimately, it's gonna be up to that probably democratically elected HOA leadership to figure out how to share or not the cost burden. But we're not mandating that it falls.
Right.
Everybody in the neighborhood.
Should we put a dollar value up to X amount, or does it really matter? I mean,
I don't think, I will go along with just, with Commissioner Rule's, 65, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But I still want this to come back, so here, one more time.
Sure.
Just to clear my head and see what we have come up with as far as wording or who's gonna say what, or how it's gonna be.
So we'll come back with a updated policy. And in that policy, I think we'll elaborate further on the purpose of this program, is what I'm hearing. In addition to that, a clear process for evaluating, confirming, and understanding how these funds are going to be held, kind of the mechanism by which we'll
Mhm.
ensure that those funds are there. Yeah, we'll.
And we can have this before, so we can move through it. I would like to on that GB that Commissioner Thornton went back to, because that kind of ties into this evaluation. I would be happy if it said, will provide guidance on the study area based upon speed, volume, speeding, number of vehicles and overall safety. Like
Site conditions.
site conditions and overall safety, so that it doesn't we just have a little bit of leeway there that it's communicated, so we can't come back later and say, we just put something in there. And this doesn't mess what we're saying, right?
It feels like there was a discussion around, what if it's not feasible? How are we keeping track when we say, no, sorry, doesn't qualify, there's nothing.
Well, maybe you wanna put that in there, we'll provide guidance on the study area based on whatever, and feasible.
And feasibility.
And feasibility,
And we'll provide a response in writing from the traffic engineer to the requester, so if they, they
Right.
see.
Right, that,
Okay,
yes.
yep, we can move forward, there's a potential for, or, I'm sorry, this is. For the site.
I think putting that feasibility is important, so
Mhm.
nobody doesn't, come
Right.
back, and you're already putting it out there. Some things may not be feasible.
Yeah, that.
We all know the experts as far as that's concerned.
Okay, we're good? So the only thing now is we have to make sure I feel like, Mayor Gertz forwarded us a list of more items to put on there. Did we get that officially in writing?
He hasn't officially assigned it, so we have to wait for him to assign it at a voting meeting.
Okay, so we have to, can someone from your office, reach out to him to put that on his list to do?
Yep.
And this goes back to, I did ask, Commissioner Myers, your question about the trash franchise. And you thought it was there.
Yeah, and I don't know if was that on the list, do you remember?
That was on the email that
Okay.
Mayor Gertz sent.
Yeah.
And so potentially could possibly be assigned as early as Tuesday.
Right, because assuming we need to have something, because let's say you guys get this update, we come in here next time, there is nothing on our official list after we approve this after the first 10 minutes.
Is he chairing the meeting tonight or are you?
I'm sharing it tonight.
Can it be announced tonight? So an
Well,
official meeting?
Yes,
Well, what is it? I mean, I think it has to be announced by the mayor. What's the difference between now and Tuesday? You're gonna be.
It doesn't matter because I do that one too.
That's right. Well, let's just.
Wherever you want, it's me.
Right, but let's see if we can get it to Mayor Pro Tem by Tuesday rather than tomorrow, or tonight, just so we're not gonna be doing anything between now and
We'll get it to.
Tuesday.
We'll reach back out to him next Tuesday.
Okay, Commissioner Thornton, you be on the lookout for that.
We'll loop the mayor in this.
Y'all have a date for next time?
Our date, do we have,
Are we in Doherty tonight,
Here.
No, we're
I think
here.
Chambers.
We're in the chambers.
Can I be excused?
Yes,
June sixth.
June 6th, do we have a quorum of those people who are here? That's the day before our voting meeting on the, budget, so I bet that most of us will be in town.
but June 6th is a Thursday, right?
Yes.
Oh, it isn't, all right, today's not Monday, is it? Okay,
It's the
Tuesday,
Thursday after. when
It's
we'll
a
have
Thursday.
Sigh of relief from the budget meeting.
yeah, okay,
We'll know in that meeting whether we've adequately funded the RTMP when we
okay,
discuss.
yeah, so, do we have a quorum for June 6th? Does anyone know they're gonna be out of town?
Not right now, I'm good.
You're gonna be out of town?
Oh, that's about beach vacation, but one of
Well,
us.
yeah, well, why don't we sit down at the beach?
Yeah, where are you going?
Nikki's got to,
Nikki's
we're
not.
going to the beach together.
Oh, that's.
I'm actually going to the
Yeah.
beach.
I forgot my birthday's
Where
here.
are you guys going? So perhaps we can find another time.
May 30th?
I don't want to do it before the voting. We're going to be covered up.
Dude,
Yeah.
can you do the 15th?
Can we do the 13th? People are gonna be, you might be out of town by the 13th.
We've got, don't we have something on the
Anymore.
14th? Is that the
It is now, yeah.
Yeah.
What is it?
Today, they added the.
charter?
The charter office, yeah.
Let's not do it on the 13th. I don't want 2 days.
Oh, it's only an hour and a half. What?
But the voting,
Y'all send me a text, let me know, email, cause I'm
Oh,
walking
how
out.
about the 12th?
so we're here.
How about the 12th? Yeah, how about the 12th? Yeah,
Wednesday, the 12th?
yeah,
Sure.
Wednesday, the 12th? Okay.
Well-
Not the 6th, instead the 12th.
Okay, well,
Mr. Culpepper, you good for the 12th?
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it.
okay.
At 1 o'clock.
Same place, maybe, same time, different date. 12, save. This event only.
Thank you for doing that.
All right, so did we make it motion to adjourn?
Not yet.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, actually, I can put back in there, I would really request that the manager's office, take care of getting a new, battery in that clock.
Oh,
Yeah.
I changed it, I changed the time last time, and then it didn't go anywhere, so I can't keep changing the time to keep it up.
that would be very,
That would be very time consuming.
okay, we have a motion, but we still need a second.
Second.
On the battery?
No.
No, on June 12th.
Okay, to adjournment, yeah,
Battery too.
yeah, the battery, okay, well, all in favor?
Uh,
Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned, and, see you at our next